Hello everyone, today, September 5th, 2025, is opening day for The Conjuring The Last Rites. This has been a long-running and successful series with now an entire universe of films surrounding it. When I was a teen, the Conjuring films were first coming out and were important to me as a young horror fan. I am a huge fan of James Wan's work, and I find The Conjuring 2 to be one of the best horror films of the 2010s. So yesterday I made sure to go to a preview screening of the film, and in today's video, I'll be giving a review of the film. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Let's review The Conjuring The Last Rites. So I guess we can start with my thoughts on the director of the film, Michael Chavez, who also directed The Conjuring 3 and The Nun 2, and he's really grown up within this franchise as a director. He started off, obviously, with The Curse of La Llorona, which was supposed to be a part of the Conjuring universe, but I think they ended up sort of disconnecting it, and now it's only sort of tangentially related. But you can definitely see a progression and an arc within his career as each successive film was just a little bit better and showed a little bit more promise for him as a director, with The Nun 2 at least giving me a small sliver of hope for this film to be a pretty good horror movie. And to be honest, I do believe The Conjuring The Last Rites is the best film he's ever directed, even if only by a small margin. So yes, it still is significantly flawed, but to me it's still at least alright, and it's fine as an ending to the franchise, though it definitely leaves a lot to be desired. The first major problem that really rears its ugly head is the pacing, and this is really seen through the way that the stories are mixed together between the Smurl family and the Warren family. Obviously, the emphasis on this film is really on the Warrens, with obviously Ed and Lorraine, played by Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, who both give great performances once again, and obviously provide such a strong emotional core to the narrative, which has always been essential in these movies, is that we really do care about the Warrens, but we also really care about the family that's being haunted, which you don't get in this film. We don't get enough with the Smurl family, we don't get enough of the progression of the sort of infestation of the house and all the different steps of a demonic possession. And it just kind of feels rushed, even though it's overly long at the same time, which is never a good feeling for a movie. It feels like they're trying to throw so much at the wall and trying to have such a strong emotional finale. It kind of feels like those movies in the MCU when we were finally getting to like Avengers Endgame and things like that were so overly long and had so many narrative through lines that they had to get to completion, and that's kind of what we're getting with this film. Is they're trying really hard to find a nice landing spot for this franchise and for this couple that we've loved for all these years and we've gone through all these journeys and crazy horror experiences with. But to be honest, I just think the writing in this film and the pacing, the way that it was directed, the way that they mixed the stories, does not work as well as in the previous films, and obviously does not match The Conjuring 1 or 2, and is one of the major problems with this film. Getting to see Judy as an adult and her relationship with Tony and all that stuff, that was great. And like I said, there is a really strong emotional core to this movie, and if anything, it really feels more like a drama than a horror movie, because those moments are just so much more effective than the horror. There's a lot more tears provided in this movie than like jolts from a jump scare that's effective. And so that's really, I would say, what the strength of the movie is the emotional aspects, the drama aspects, while the negatives are really the horror aspects and the sort of tight control that you would expect out of a Conjuring film to really feel like you're on this thrill ride with a master of horror, which is not something Michael Chavez is able to emulate. Maybe we're just so tired and we understand now the way that the games are played, but I really just don't think that the jump scares were well executed at all in this film. There's very few that ever really were that scary, and to be honest, I felt like the jump scares just needed to be a little bit more intense, or maybe a little bit longer. It felt like they were just so quickly thrown in as like, oh yeah, we need to do this, and we're going to kind of half-heartedly do a jump scare here and there. And to be honest, they just weren't very effective, and I'm a fan and someone who can appreciate a really well-done jump scare, but this is not that film at all, and Michael Chavez still struggles to make a scary movie, and really it's just leaning on Patrick Wilson, Vera Farmiga, and some of his other actors to carry the emotional aspects, because the horror just isn't effective at all. So yeah, I'd definitely say that Mia Tomlinson and Ben Hardy also give good performances as Judy and Tony, and yeah, I definitely do care about their relationship and things like that, but like I said, not a very scary movie at all, and that's really disappointing for this iconic horror franchise. And not only were the scares underwhelming, but also the anticlimactic final battle was such a huge letdown. I cannot believe that a spinning mirror was really the final boss of the Conjuring films. It was like, really, this is it, and this is how they're going to stand up to it? You're just going to, put your hands to the mirror and be like, I believe in you, and we're standing against you, and all this stuff. It's just like, that was really disappointing. That just felt like, really, you had no better ideas for the climax of the whole franchise, the big ultimate final battle for the Warrens, the one that sends them into retirement. It's just that. Especially since the opening half of the movie was really trying to sell this as a very brutal and bleak adventure for the Warrens, that they were just very beaten down and were feeling this sort of dread permeate everything, oh, it's different this time. And then it just leads to a spinning mirror. That's it. And I don't know, it just felt very underwhelming. And also, of course, we don't really care about the Smurl family at all, which also hurts that aspect of the horror movie, of the possession horror movie. So this just kind of felt like a very messy movie. I did have only cautious optimism, only the most very cautious optimism for this movie, and it was able to clear the bar of being okay, but ultimately, weak jump scares, weak inventiveness of the demon, the storyline with the Smurls was underbaked. Everything just felt underbaked and underdelivered. And while it still is able to clear the bar of being okay and being Chavez's best directed film, it still pales in comparison to The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2. And while it is better than The Conjuring 3, that's really not a big, accomplishment. They could have definitely set their aims a little bit higher and unleashed their creativity to make a truly fun horror movie, which is really what made those first two movies so successful and why we're all such fans of those movies. And I think a lot of that was just missing from this final story. Now, with that being said, like with all the other Conjuring movies, the set design and decoration, wardrobe, just everything felt very period specific, and that just gave off a great vibe. I always love seeing what everyone's wearing and just the way that the world is sort of built up within the set decoration and design within these movies. It's always just very exquisite, right? It's sort of a weird little small pleasure of these movies, but they did nail that aspect. And this always allows for the films to be easier to get sucked into, these stories of these characters, because there's such a great grounded realism, even within all the enhanced theatrical aspects that these films are known for. There is sort of a grounded realism and a sort of almost feeling of nostalgia that you have for these time periods. So yeah, on that front, again, very well done. So you have to commend everybody for that. One aspect that I did find really funny, this was something that felt like, okay, this is a Conjuring movie. This is really funny, even though it's supposed to be scary. And that's the super tall Annabelle scene. That was so amazing. I was laughing my ass off in the theaters. That was so great. And when I say that, it's not like, oh my gosh, I'm laughing at the movie, so it's bad. That's not what The Conjuring does. What James Wan's been able to do with films like Insidious and The Conjuring and even Malignant is incorporate humor into the scares in such a way that makes it a fun roller coaster ride. Because when you're riding a roller coaster, guess what? It's not always just scary and pure adrenaline, but there's also a lot of fun, and that's just part of it. And I think James Wan understands that psychology of horror movies and horror audiences in a way that almost no other horror filmmaker does. And I always love that about his movies. And the tall Annabelle scene really felt like just pure The Conjuring at its best. So that was a great moment. I just never expected to see something like that, but it was so great. I also just want to touch on the cameos at the end, which were fun, even if a little bit expected. You have a lot of the families and other members of this sort of universe, of the mainline films at least. And of course you saw James Wan sort of seeing off the end of his franchise. But to be honest, seeing him, even though I was happy to see him on the big screen, I was like, oh man, this just makes me wish you were directing this movie, if anything. So it was kind of a bit of a bittersweet moment there at the end. Of course, if you're watching a Conjuring movie, you know you gotta watch the credits. They're always really wonderfully produced and have such a great eerie feel, and this was definitely probably one of the weaker credit sequences. It was still well done enough. Now, the one thing that was kind of surprising within this credit sequence was once you actually got to the actual credits towards the end when it wasn't being stylized anymore, and I see the name Doobie White show up for additional editing. Doobie White, the editor behind films like Resident Evil, The Final Chapter, known for their absolutely insane frenetic editing, and I did not feel that vibe with this movie at all, so it was just really interesting and funny to see his name, and I was like, okay, I'm glad I sat through the credits, because I definitely would not have expected to see Doobie White show up in a Conjuring movie, so that's great. I also found it interesting the way they sort of tried to address the controversy surrounding the Warrens with like a single sentence. They're like, oh yeah, their controversial life and work, remains influential or whatever in the field, but they were kind of like, as long as we just use the word controversial, it's okay, we cover our bases. It's like, I don't think so, right? Most people, I think, at this point are aware that they're kind of frauds and scam artists, but we really do care about the fictional Warrens, at least I do, and I'm able to put aside the fact that the real life Warrens were really fraudsters and things like that. So, yeah, that was kind of funny that they tried to like, oh, if we just put controversial in there, we can kind of cover our bases and act like they were still did something to bring paranormal research into the mainstream. It's like, no, they completely have not brought any legitimacy to the field of parapsychology, I guess you could call it. So yeah, that's about my thoughts on the film. There's my review. I think it's an okay movie. Not great, definitely underwhelming for a final entry, but nonetheless the best thing Michael Chavez has ever directed, but still kind of towards the middle tier of the films within this franchise. And if we look back now at a retrospective glance at the franchise as a whole, it's still a really strong mainline series at the very least, even though I think the universe in general is very hit or miss. None of the movies are necessarily great outside of The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2, which are still iconic, legendary, instant classic sort of horror movies that I think are going to continue to be remembered. Meanwhile, the rest of these movies, it's kind of hit or miss. They'll still be somewhat, people will be fans of specific ones. Like, I'm a fan of The Nun and stuff like that, but for the most part, I think on a consistent basis, most people are going to be like, yeah, the first two movies were the good ones, the rest of them were just kind of cash grabs, which I think, it maybe isn't entirely fair, but I think that's going to be the legacy of this franchise, which has been so influential on the modern horror genre. And then the last thing I just wanted to touch on is that 2025 has been a good year for horror movies. I've been a little bit disappointed with some of the films that have come out recently, but this is a solid movie. It's probably going to be in the middle of the bunch when I do my ranking at the end of the year for 2025 horror movies. Now I want to hear y'all's thoughts in the comments section below. Please let me know if you're a fan of The Conjuring Last Rites, what your thoughts on the series in general are. I would love to talk horror with you guys. I'm a huge fan. So thank you all for watching this video. Please don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications if you liked the video. And thank you once again for watching all the way to the end. I'll see you next time.